Hello and welcome to Chess Please. My name is Andy and today I wanted to cover off one of the rarest tactics in all of chess. Now, by the time you reach sort of post-beginner intermediate stage in chess, probably around like the 1200 to 1400 rating range, you will likely have covered off almost all of the tactics you're ever going to use in chess. Things like pins, skewers, forks, double attacks, discovered attacks, all of those things, kind of the bread and butter of most tactical operations. As you move up the chains a little bit more, you understand things like deflections, interference, decoys, magnetism, those kind of more complicated steps that kind of fall in that tactical arsenal that you have. Today's tactic that I wanted to cover off is called the Plachutta, and it's kind of the final evolution of several of these tactics rolled up into one. It's incredibly rare, but it is pretty beautiful when it happens and pretty complicated all told. So a Plachutta occurs first and foremost where you make a move that causes double interference. So you move one of your pieces in the way of two or more of your opponent's pieces, blocking them from controlling key squares. And because of this, a Plachutta is kind of the ultimate way of throwing a spanner in your opponent's defensive operations. So the first thing is a double interference. So again, that double block. The Plachuttery of it all comes from when either piece that is being interfered with takes back that piece that you're using to block, it actually kind of gets in its pal's way. It gets in its mate's way, forcing them to do, kind of the two pieces are doing one job, the same job, rather than before each piece was doing its own separate job because they weren't in each other's way. I said they were complicated. Let's look at our first example here, which is kind of a drawn up study. But in this case, white has mate in 3. White pretty winning comfortably almost no matter what you do, but specifically for mate in 3 you need to employ the Plachutta. So as I mentioned, we need to do a double interference. Looking at the position here, white is pretty much ready to drop the hammer either way here on a8 or g8 by just sliding the rook down. King has no escape squares onto the rank above, but in black's defense they have both of those squares covered. They have a8 and g8 covered by their queen and bishop irrespectively. So the first stage in our Plachutta, or the Plachutta, comes about with the wonderful d5. And again, this is kind of like a drawn up grotesque, but this could happen. And you'll see here again, both are being blocked from their key defensive squares. So there's no coverage of those. So they need to act now. They need to do something that will bring back the coverage of these. And you might be thinking, okay, well, let's say if we take with the queen, both of these squares are covered. That is true, but this queen is now covering 2 and it needs to do the bishop's job. It's in the way of the bishop, so it has to be the first to act. So in this particular case, the win for white would be rook to a8, because normally the bishop would be able to drop back here, take the rook, and the queen would still have control of this square, but because it's now in the bishop's way, it has to be the one to do the bishop's job, and now the rook over here on g7 is free to move to g8 and deliver mate. Again, in the exact same fashion, if we take with the bishop instead, very same thing happens. The bishop is now in the queen's way, has to do the queen's job for it, and when it does so we go bang, rook to g8, bishop has to be the one to take this rook, which frees up the rook that previously the bishop was defending on a8 and delivers checkmate. That's a pretty condensed, like simplified version of a Plachutta. The next example will knock your socks off. Let's have a look. So our second example of a Plachutta is the much more famous example. This comes from a real game in 1914 between Siegbert Tarrasch and a group called the Allies. Not the war fighting group, a group of chess players that called themselves the Allies. So in this position, Siegbert is playing as white, white to play, mate in 5, unstoppable mate in 5. And the king does look in a little bit of trouble, but there's plenty of defensive resources here with the rook and the queen around, so it's hard to see like what the specific mate in 5 move is, but because we're studying Plachuttas, there's a bit of a clue there. So the move that Tarrasch played is often heralded as one of the most beautiful moves in chess history, and it makes a very strong case for it, because the move is bishop to c7, and that's the Plachutta. The double interference we're talking about here is you're stopping the rook from defending this c5 pawn, which is under immense pressure from white's rooks. You're also stopping the queen from defending this b7 square, which the queen slams in here, that's mate immediately. And even if the bishop weren't there, if the queen was on b7, king takes here, either rook can slide across here, and it's curtains for the king. So this bishop is providing the first step of this Plachutta, where you're double interfering with two key defensive resources of blacks. Now let's take a look at either sideline, where first and foremost, if the queen takes, because hey, like how bad can that be if the queen is now defending c5 as well and still keeps grasp on b7? That's all good. However, in this particular case, there is another whopper of a move, which in its own right is beautiful enough to win a game. But it's rook takes on c5 here, because even if queen takes on c5, then again, it's been deflected. It's given up that b7 square, and we can schluze on in here. King takes on a5, and as we mentioned, rook strolling across here to a1 to deliver the checkmate. Absolutely fantastic. So that is, if the queen takes, then it is still defending c7 or b7, but the queen itself is kind of in the way of its own rook, because it has to be the one to take back on c5 to prevent mate, giving up that b7 square. I said they were complicated. They're very complicated. So let's take a look at the other defensive resource that black has here. Say, for example, rook taking the bishop here. In this particular case, another absolute ludicrous move. There's just down every corner a brilliancy. So rook takes here, queen b7. Don't even give a bother. And again, this Plachutta effect of when the piece captures back, it kind of gets in the way of its pal. So in this case, rook capturing back gets in the way of the queen, i.e. it has to be the one to capture back the queen. When it does so, that again frees up this c5 square to take, and that's checkmate as well. No way out. And if you don't do anything, if you just don't bother your Barney, you just make a random move like this, then rook takes on c5 straight away is mate. The computer gives some absolute nonsense where you can throw in some spite checks like rook takes on g2, queen takes on g2, queen takes on c7, and then you just go back to your classic Plachutta, which is this, and then bang, bang. So that's the absolute nonsense that the computer comes up with, like technically mate in 4 because you give some time waster checks, although that was a decent effort. But that's the Plachutta, named after Joseph Plachutta from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As many of these old European chess examples come from, they're often drawn up by people who were born in countries that no longer exist. Some good pre-World War I hijinks. And actually even Siegbert Tarrasch was born in the Prussian Empire, in the kind of Polish part, but I believe I identified as German. So that's the two lads. Joseph Plachutta drew it up as a chess puzzle designer. Siegbert Tarrasch actually used it with one of the most beautiful moves in the world, which we've just seen there. So that's the Plachutta. If you ever get the chance to use one, which is exceedingly rare, share it far and wide, because they are real beauties, complete triumph on the chessboard. Unbelievably hard to spot, I would say. So that's all from me, folks. If you had a good time, please feel free to subscribe and stick around for more nonsense like this. Otherwise, have a great day either way.